Hi, I'm Ira Winkler. I'm the CISO CISO and just all-around security person.
Hi, I'm Reuven Aronashvili. I'm the founder and CEO of CYE and happy to be here with Ira. So let's start with some buzzwords that we see all around, right? Web3, for example. What do you think about Web3, NFT, the blockchain?
I submitted a presentation that's yet to be accepted, which it better be accepted at RSA for the lunacy of Web3, because everybody thinks of Web3 as this magical thing. Like it's, in short,
it's on the blockchain, so it's secure.
Yeah,
right?
that's it. And like, that's essentially Web3. It's a combination of, how would I phrase it? It's a combination of crypto and NFTs. And I attended an executive presentation where they had CEOs of the more notable companies that are involved with both NFTs and cryptocurrency. And what happened was they had this lovely conversation, which made everything out to be unicorns and rainbows. And then I was talking to a vice president of a, let's just say, very large internet company afterwards, and she was like, "What do you think of it?" I go, "Well, my head didn't explode." And she's like, "What do you mean?" I'm like, "Throughout the whole conversation, did you hear anything about cybersecurity?" And she was like, "No." And I'm like, and she's like, "Are there concerns?" And I'm like, a vice president of an internet-based company not aware of the billions of dollars of theft of cryptocurrency, of the major hacks of NFT exchanges? And everybody thinks, okay, it's on the blockchain. The blockchain is good. The blockchain is a good technology, but think of a blockchain as being one card in a house of cards,
Right.
which is the underlying technology that enables these things. And yes, maybe one card is made of platinum, like a platinum credit card, but the rest of it is a house of cards, and that's the problem.
Of course. Starting from the personal key management on the edge device itself, going through the smart contracts, the relevant, let's say, market-related risks. For example, you mentioned the cryptocurrency, right? The things that we've seen lately, or the latest attacks, are not even on the blockchain. Those are trading mistakes that are being leveraged, or things that are not totally understood by the different developers of those smart contracts. But I'm not even referring to the basic things, cybersecurity, DNS poisoning and account hijacking that we are used to, things that are on a higher level. Developing a capability that was, in a way, all the arbitrage that we see in the past in the public stock exchange. Now we're coming back and seeing that in a blockchain environment, because the blockchain can be very mature, but the trading platform around it is not.
Yeah, and part of the problem is there's two levels of maturity we have to look at. Like, there was a hack that, frankly, I hate to describe criminals as brilliant, but there was a pretty brilliant hack where there was one of the crypto exchanges. They had their mobile app, and people would manage their wallet on the mobile device. And what happened was some criminal figured out that the app basically used publicly open source software.
Yeah.
The criminal hacked the developer of that piece of the open source software, embedded malware into it, and then on the next release, the app developer basically uploaded the latest version of their library program, and it put a backdoor for the criminals to clean out people's crypto wallets. And that in and of itself is interesting, but the more important thing was, everybody's money was gone, and there's nothing anybody would do to solve the problem. There was no law enforcement agency that could theoretically know where to start investigating. The crypto exchange did not cover the losses, because there is no, like in the US, we have the FDIC and ensuring deposits and everything. It's just gone. It's like, the people involved in Web3, the crypto bros, are going to hate me anyway. Well, they already do hate me, but the crypto bros, they act like everything's perfect, but they don't realize that they're building, again, I come back to the house of cards expression, where it's not even recoverable. Like, Seth Green, sorry to go, well, it's actually on topic. Seth Green, the actor, bought the Bored Ape NFTs, like basically pictures. and somebody hacked his NFT wallet and stole it, and he acted like it was all gone. I'm like, in the real world, it's like, first off, copyright law, that he still theoretically owns the stuff, and let the criminal try to say they're violating it. But it's instead he renegotiated buying back the stuff from the criminals, which I don't know. You would never see that. Somebody taking a picture, stealing the picture and saying, I now own it, buy it back from me. It wouldn't happen.
The concept of negotiating, by the way, with criminals, that becomes an issue that a lot of organizations actually face. It's not about Web3 specifically, right? So you find yourself in a situation of ransomware or double extortion when private data was extracted from your organization. And now you need to make a decision specifically. How do you going to react to it? I had so many times people saying, hey, you know what, I'm not negotiating with terrorists. And then 2 weeks later, they're saying, you know what, we have to find a way to speak with these guys, right? We are on our knees. We have to have this decryption key, or making sure that they are not going to post our data out. What's your thoughts about generally paying ransom, not paying ransom? What are even the considerations that the company should take?
So I personally find it heinous to think about paying criminals. Then, unfortunately, all cybersecurity at the end of the day has to be about business. If there is a law passed which says it is illegal to pay criminals, which frankly, I kind of wish there was, because it would take the decision away.
Right.
But if it is a valid, possible business decision, a smart business person is going to be like, do I keep my company shut down and lose tens of millions of dollars a day, if not more? Or do I pay them the $2 million in ransom? And that, I unfortunately have to say, I wish I would tell them, don't you dare do it, but I can't do that in good faith. It's like, as cyber professionals, I think we all run into situations where it's unfortunately a moral versus business versus legal decision-making process. And clearly, if we have a legal decision, we have to abide by the law. But then when it becomes moral versus practical, it's unfortunate, but sometimes you have to do what's right. And luckily, I've never been part of an organization that had to consider paying a ransom, but it's, I don't know what to say. It's kind of, I hate to sound like a lawyer, but it depends at the end of the day.
It really depends. And, there are some consequences to paying ransom that you should take also into consideration. For example, there are, a lot of statistics out there, right, about what is happening. And one of the things that we hear over and over again is that companies that paid ransom actually, in a way, are being attacked again. The reason for that being that maybe they are listed in some blacklist. They're saying, hey, this company is willing to pay. Because in the end, the attackers, the criminals, they want highest return on investment. It's very simple, right? So if you have a target that that this target is going to pay, let's try to chase it, because you have two things that First, they were hacked before. That means that cybersecurity maturity at least was low. Maybe it still is. And second thing, that if you can press them enough, if the pressure point is something that you can actually get, then that they will pay. So that's very good target. If you were in a sales organization, you say, hey, that's a very good target for your customer, right? And I would say, unfortunately, these guys are much more service-oriented than you find in some of the biggest organizations. So if you want to speak with them, they are very friendly, they are answering very fast, 24/7 support, things that you don't find in some of your best service providers. But generally speaking, any other considerations that you think that you should have?
Well, you have to realize that just because you pay, it doesn't mean it's going to work. Right. There have been cases where, frankly, most companies do backups and they never test their backups to make sure they actually work as intended, to reload it. Right. And you might pay a criminal and they might not actually have the right key to give back because the criminal just got lucky. Then we haven't discussed the concept of extortion, where pretty much I would say, luckily, a lot of companies can handle, in theory, a ransom-based attack because they do have good backups, they do have good processes in place. But then if you have, in theory, stolen data,
Right.
that becomes a different calculation, because it's not just you now in paying money, it's how much do you potentially want to put other people at risk by having their information released if they are your clients. And I don't have a right answer for that, because like I said, they still might take the data, they might release it, you don't know. Much like most companies, we delete your data. You might find they don't delete the data and another criminal steals it from them to extort you later, but it's a mess. I'm curious, when did you get started with the concept of focusing on risk management? Because frankly, you come from a red team background, incident response background, and usually, for lack of a polite way of saying it, red teamers have this attitude like, I'm just going after it, any vulnerability is fair game.
Right.
But what made your decision to kind of step away from that and focus on the bigger picture?
That's a great question. When you're serving others, right? When we were in the Israeli red team, when I started my professional career, on the other side, you meet people that you're presenting a report, you're saying, hey, those are the things that I found. You have someone on the other side saying, you know what, I love what you did, but now what? So I have tons of vulnerabilities, right? And we meet there, by the way, on a daily basis, right? We go to a customer, they say, hey, we don't need more vulnerabilities. We need you to help us put the spotlight, the focus on those items that will provide specific return on investment to our organization. And then when you meet that over and over and over again, so you change your approach from let me win everything that I can from the offensive perspective, which, you can find a lot of people still going with this approach, to an approach that you say, hey, I want the organization to really see the improvement level. Because in the end, Red Team is a great tool, but it's a tool. It's not more than that. If you want to improve the organization, a Red Team won't do that, right? It will give you the insights into what you need to do, but that's only the first step. From there, you need to do at least two other things. First, to correlate the information that you've collected to the business risk, understand the business needs, serve the business, and based on that, you come with a mitigation program or specific topics that you want to resolve based on a mechanism that you need to develop that actually takes risk into consideration. We hear risk-based approach as a buzzword. That's something that we hear quite a lot. But what is risk-based approach? Is it the technical risk? Severity level, for example, if it's critical, that means that your business is at risk. So those are good questions that actually took us some time to get to the right approach, because from my point of view at the beginning, if it's technical, if it's SQL injection that is exposed to the internet, that's it, you have to fix it. But the simple question, does it impact my business? That's something that we didn't ask at the beginning. I'm talking 10, 12 years back.
Yeah. I think one of the problems is, because I've been talking about risk management since at least 1996. I'm dating myself. And the problem...
You're much smarter. You're much smarter than myself.
But the concept, the problem is, I hear risk management as a buzzword, where everybody says we do risk management. Like I used to joke, like when I give a presentation, I ask at some point, every so often I say, how many of you are security professionals? Everybody raise their hands. I go, you're all failures. And they go, and everybody's like, look, I go, here's the problem. Security, the definition of security is being free from risk. You're never going to be free from risk. You're all risk managers. Now, the problem is that every so often you have vendors who come out and say, we do risk management. You hear risk management people talking, and the problem I usually see is that cybersecurity people talk risk management, but they never use the term as the science it's intended to be. Because when we look at, for example, let's just say the risk managers who are actually doing it as a science, like actuaries, like people inside, like CFOs who are calculating things and doing things. In cybersecurity, ironically, up until we've always been talking about it, but nobody's actually really knows what they're doing. They're like, I'm calculating the risk. And they're like, well, we're doing this, but they haven't been able to do risk management as a formal scientific process,
Right.
which is really the problem, because when you don't have a scientific process, you're going by gut feel.
And the fear factor.
And yeah,
You're going to your board and say, it's risky. We are going to lose the company. Why? What are the numbers? What are you talking about? That's a simple question that you can ask as a board member, right? And that's something that we don't hear a lot. But
and we need the profession to talk. Like, yeah, we help, and obviously I'm biased, but I had a friend who, like, probably more than a decade ago, like he was showing me an iPad at a conference, and he pulled up this iPad. He's like, here's what I do. I walk into my meeting and I say, here's the budget I want. And they come back, and let's just say, for the sake of argument, he wants $50 million. The board talks, it's like, we'll give you $42 million. He's like, okay, and he opens up his app, and he's like, okay, for $42 million, I could get rid of this, 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 and this. So we're saving $8 million and on the security side, but we have a risk exposure of an extra $325 million. And okay, accept, and now please sign here. And he has a signature block on the iPad for the CEO to sign. And I tell people, you get the budget you deserve, not the budget you need. He gets the budget he needs by deserving it, by actually proving it. Now, I don't know if the app he had just was a fake number made up, say multiply whatever it is by, 100 whatever.
But the message is there.
But he actually was able to use that to say, there is a business decision that you have to make if you are going to reject a request for money for risk mitigation. You have to acknowledge that the risk you are attempting to mitigate is now potentially more likely to be realized, and you need to accept that. And we need people to, again, approach it like a discipline as opposed to something that's more like what I call bro science, as opposed to an actual science that every other profession has. That's why cybersecurity, in my opinion, is the bastard child of an organization in many cases, because we just make up numbers, or we don't justify our existence in the same way everybody else does.
But here is the point. Why do you think that is? Because, when you say what you say, it's very logical, right? You say, hey, if I'm able to demonstrate the differences, if I'm able to demonstrate the risk, if I'm able to talk numbers, everyone understands. Why do you think it is? Is it hard? Is it complicated? Yeah. Is it cultural issue?
I think we have people who are never trained to do this. If I walk and I talk to a COO, and that COO says, I have a, they look, for example, let's talk total quality management or whatever, the Six Sigma, whatever they call it this month. Yeah. And essentially what's going on is, in Six Sigma, they look at what is the cost of an individual error. Let's tie that to a number. And what are the number of things, and then every step along the process. If I have a point, it's only a 1% failure rate, that sounds good. But then they look at it, well, we have 12 processes across the whole, we have 12 steps across the whole process, so our failure rate is 12%, not 1%. And that way they start rationalizing, justifying it using numbers. And in cybersecurity, the people really haven't got down the concept of numbers, of calculating the math, understanding risk. I got to admit, in many cases, it's hard, because safety science is a field that is very dependent upon numbers. They save companies tens of millions, hundreds of millions of dollars, because they know what an injury costs. If there's an injury on a factory floor and the factory has to be shut down, they know how much it costs.
It's very predictable. Right?
And they calculate the number of incidents over the course of a year. Yeah. How many people are doing that in cybersecurity?
Not a lot.
Not a lot. And, and we come down to this in, so, anyway, I keep coming down, at least Cy provides these numbers. Again, I'm not pitching, it's just like, I've been advocating for this product for since 1996. So I'm excited about it. But people need to understand the numbers and give people that cost benefit of, hey, you want to cut my budget by 10%? I can't do anything about that, but I'm going to tell you before I walk out of this room, you cut my budget by 10%, you're increasing the risk we face by $138.7 million.
Right.
And that's what security professionals need to be able to do.
You see this motion, by the way, of shared accountability. You know, if you look 5 years ago, 10 years ago, the CISO was the one to be blamed, right? Something happened, you see them getting fired and that's it. Management is okay, they replace the problem. But now, since I think, some stories that we had, Target Story, Equifax, and so on, we've seen that management and board of directors are actually taking an active part, and more than that, accountability on cybersecurity. It's not only about the CISO anymore. And the motion that you just described, hey, this is the risk. I'm reflecting the risk. I'm the CISO or the security responsible or the risk manager. I'm reflecting the risk to you. You make the decision. Is that something that you see worldwide as a trend, or it's still the CISO is the one to be blamed?
I would wish that happens. The problem is, in some cases, I shouldn't say this, but in some cases, the CISO is to blame, because I don't blame. For example, let's talk about the Equifax incident. I don't blame the CISO because they made a big deal, and the CEO made the statement it was the intern or whatever, or it was the admin who didn't update the software. I don't blame an organization for getting hit by a vulnerability that was announced 3 days before, which happened, because you can't just magically wave a wand and say, bing, it's fixed. You have to go through testing. So 3 days, not unreasonable, it's bad, it happened. The problem was they didn't detect the bad guy while the bad guy was still there, because they let their certificates expire, or the certificates expire, which meant that their intrusion detection systems didn't pick up the bad guy and didn't pick up the person doing reconnaissance for 6 weeks and downloading data for 6 weeks. That's where the failure was. People get in, incidents happen, but why did they not detect it? They did not detect it because the certificate expired. Now, that's a process. Can I say things happen and that, yes? Can I accept the fact the CEO blames an admin for not updating a system? No, I can't.
Right.
And so, but there might be a bit of a shared thing, but because I think CISOs sometimes create their own problems. And they create their own problems by telling their executives they do security. Security implies the absence of risk. And they need to say, look, the one promise I can make you is we will have an incident. And a CISO doesn't want to say that. You need to say we will have an incident. But I promise you, if you give me the proper resources, we will actively and proactively manage any incidents. Maybe we can stop an incident before loss is realized, but even if loss is realized, if you give me the proper resources, my systems created will be able to mitigate and contain the loss to the best of the ability. And that's the only promise a CISO should make, but they have to have, I'll go a little off topic. Credit card fraud is billions of dollars a year. That's a given, or maybe hundreds, but probably billions a year. Does anybody fire the person in charge of managing the credit cards at any large bank? No. Why? Because the person who manages the credit card units says, you know what? We are going to experience credit card fraud, but we have accounted for that within the system, and we are still massively profitable because we charge ungodly interest rates, and that more than makes up for any losses. And then, yes, we are going to mitigate fraud to the best of our abilities, but we consider that in the business calculation. Cybersecurity people need to have the same attitude.
Yeah, I'm totally with you. That's an interesting angle, by the way. why do you think, maybe last question on this topic, why do you think, you said that CISOs are not saying that. Why do you think it is? Because from my point of view, what you just said, an incident will happen, that's a given. It's not a question, right? And everyone understands it. Right? You see that everywhere. The statements, incident is not a question of if, it's a question of when, right? I heard that too many times. And still you're saying CISOs are not saying that. Is it psychology blockage? What is the issue there?
I honestly think that they look at, maybe there's a sense of fear, maybe there's a lack of understanding on the part of their management. I mean, the mature companies that I've worked for in the past, I don't want to name them, obviously, but you can figure it out. They, incidents, they understand that things will happen and things are proactively put in place and everything. The problem is, and I saw some statistic I probably shouldn't have seen because I searched the internet and found a proprietary report, but there was a document which said that 80% of money invested in cybersecurity was invested in protection. Only 20% was put in detection and reaction. And that might be a little bit because the CISOs, again, are focusing on protection, not detection, because that's their mindset, or maybe their goal is to stop things. But I mean, the mature CISOs understand their job is mitigating risk, which includes the inevitable incidents. Less mature CISOs, and maybe it's not just them, but it's their organization that has this false expectation that they're telling their CISOs maybe in jest, but maybe an underlying tone of serious, you better make sure I'm not on the cover of the Wall Street Journal. And it's
in a way, maybe CISO thinks that it makes him look less professional, but to me, that's the most professional thing to say. To manage the risk and the expectations in the right way. But hopefully the industry is going there. As you mentioned, mature organizations are already doing that. Hopefully that's really the trend that we will see in the market soon.
We can hope.
So Ira, with the situation in the market that you see, right, the financial situation, the crisis, recession, how do you see the security budgets behaving next year?
So I see two possibilities. One is, I see two realities. One reality for some companies is it's going to stay flat, and that's as opposed to growth that should have happened. And then other budgets are going to be decreased. And I see, because I know a lot of people want to know, how can I magically cut my budget by 10%? And some of it is defensive, some of it is dictated, because they need to know how to run a tighter system on the resources that they have, because they see the headwinds. And frankly, it's almost self-perpetuating, where you see people laying people off because of this, which gives less money into the economies. And then once there's less money into the economies, the recession becomes self-realizing again. But cybersecurity is unfortunately going to be one of them, and they're going to have to pick and choose where they can cut budget. And that's a problem, because...
what would be a good strategy for that? Because now you say, I'm looking at the CISO, when we're working with a lot of them, you look at me and say, I'm under budgeted, right? It's always the case. You're always under budgeted. And now you need even to cut things that you already have up and running. How do you do that?
So... I'm biased. I'm biased because I would say they could use Hiver to figure this out and figure that, because honestly, there's a way to, with the right technology, you can figure out, hey, wait a second, how can I get this better use of my current budget? So that's number one, and realign and figure out which countermeasures are having the most impact for risk mitigation.
That's interesting.
That would be the way I would wish I would, with Hiver, I could start that way. And then with the other cases, unfortunately, you have to look at going backwards, because if you don't have something to help you calculate this, what happens by default, the way I've seen CISOs do this, is they have their staples of the program. They are not going to get rid of antivirus. They are not going to get rid of their firewalls or whatever the case may be. It's just there. The contracts are in place. The contracts are written. everything is paid for. Now, theoretically, they could go back, try to negotiate better pricing with the vendors, but good luck with that. Then that leaves the concept of discretionary new spending. It leaves, unfortunately, the place to cut budget, depending on how their numbers work inside an organization, is to lay off people. And those are because you can easier, I hate to say this, it's sad, but you can easier lay off people than get rid of a tool that you are in the process have already paid for or have under contract. And that's sad because the people are the ones who then suffer because there was a contract written. But besides the people and the new spending, which is unfortunate because the newer tools people are buying are frequently some of the most valuable and, possibly some of the most helpful. And then, squeezing the other things like travel, vacation, training, and everything else, that's a bad thing.
Obviously. So, from hearing things that we've discussed already, like risk management and risk-based approach, we'll hear more budget efficiency when it comes to cybersecurity. So the phrase budget efficiency, which I have to say we didn't hear a lot in the past when it comes to cybersecurity. You always hear, hey, we need more tools, we need more capabilities. Now budget efficiency, that's an interesting point of view. And I think, from my point of view at least, that's something that we always try to analyze and see efficiency, not only on the financial aspect, but really I added a tool to my set of tools, to my IT environment, or to my network in general. Did I just increase the attack surface, or I actually get a specific benefit there? And that's something that is not, it's not the state of mind that we see in a lot of organizations, but definitely now with the financial aspect as well, maybe this kind of discussion will start.
Well, unfortunately, when I hear people having to cut their budgets, they're not talking budget efficiency. They are talking, what can I cut? And it's not, what should I cut? Maybe at some point, first they ask what can they cut, then they break that down. And that's like, okay, these things are already paid for and everything, but they're not making, even when it comes to that, they're not making the right conscious decisions. They're not making the decisions with science in there. And that becomes a problem because budget efficiency implies, how can I reallocate my budget potentially to be more efficient, to save 10% while still not increasing the potential harm? There's almost like a given when I've spoken to CISOs who have to cut their budget that they are going to cut 10%, and it's where can they start? And then it's like in their back of their head, hopefully these are the people, like, for example, okay, I have a reason to cut my worst performers that I've been forced to put in the bottom 10% over every performance appraisal. And now what happens is you cut the bottom 10% of your performers. Now the other 20% and 30% become your bottom 10. So you're starting to cut quality and people you need. And that may or may not help efficiency unless somebody's completely useless. But then again, it's a logical decision, not a scientific decision. And I like numbers. I like well-used numbers, not fake numbers. And I wish that's how people would make their decision.
Yeah, we are trying to do that. but you talk about next year, we talk about budget. Now we have the geopolitical situation out there, a financial crisis that is going together. Looking forward to 2023, what do you think would be the main trends that we see first from the offensive side, or let's say the threat trends that we see in 2023, and with all the situation and the consequences of budget loss or budget efficiency, layoffs of people and so on, how do you see the industry reacting to those emerging trends?
The problem is it's a knee-jerk reaction typically. It's like in many cases, it's like putting whether the expression is playing whack-a-mole with them, putting a Band-Aid over, because the way to handle a problem strategically is to say, okay, here is, well, for example, one of the biggest things obviously we're going to see are thefts of cryptocurrency, NFT, attacks against Web3, because it's easy money. Then the next thing we're probably going to see, because people always want this revolutionary new attack. We're not going to see revolutionary. We're going to see evolutionary. Whatever the criminals are doing successfully today, they will find ways to do more successfully tomorrow. Mm-hmm. And why would they have to do something new when the old things still work? Mm-hmm. And so we're going to see it
work efficiently.
Well, yeah, they'll just be more efficient. Ransomware, it's like the whole criminal. Like, I don't know if a lot of people realize the infrastructure, like the criminal market, it's not even an infrastructure, it's a marketplace for ransomware, where somebody could go ahead and say, I would like to become an affiliate of you, and I would like to rent your ransomware, and I will put it in. Then there's an approval process.
And revenue sharing. It's very advanced, right? It's really nice.
There's a commission infrastructure. And it works for them, but we're not seeing the same strategies. Like sharing information is obviously helpful.
Right.
But, but I just see the criminals seeing the successes they have and say, okay, this is obviously working, that's not working. They're going to start to put their resources, because at the end of the day, it's it's not Willie Loman, it's the Willie Sutton strategy. Why do you rob why do you rob banks? Because that's where the money is. Why do you use ransomware? Because that's where I get my money. Mm-hmm. And we're going to see a lot more of that. Maybe we're going to move to crypto, but again, we have to think evolutionary, not revolutionary, depending upon things from a geopolitical situation, which you mentioned. The more, I guess you would rephrase it as, rogue nations have less to lose, the more they're going to go ahead and do things like North Korea, for example. They fund their country through computer crime in large part, and nobody likes to talk. Like, they steal tens of millions, if not more, on a given hack. And why are they doing that? Because they use their military as essentially a criminal organization to attack for ransomware, to attack for thefts, whatever the case is. And we're going to see that they're highly efficient. And then we're going to see like rogue nations who have nothing to, the less a nation has to lose, the more they're likely to they're going to start using more egregious attacks. So when you look, for example, when Iran tried to poison the water supply in Israel,
they are still trying.
They're still,
as we speak.
As we speak, they're still trying. And why are they doing that? Because they have nothing to lose, nothing to stop them, unless it's going to be all-out war to escalate. But right now it's being treated cyber to cyber. And, and if they're successful, maybe it'll go more than cyber. But that's not for me to decide in any way, shape, or form.
Of course, when I was in the army, by the way, cyber war is a war, right? From my point of view, the consequences, if you think about something like Stuxnet, right? The outcome of this kind of an attack, 5 years of delay, right, in the nuclear plan. Even if you take a combat jet here from Israel and you try to bombard the environment there, I'm not sure that you are getting 5 years of delay in the plan, right? Yeah. So cybersecurity attacks can be extremely efficient. So it's a war, right?
Yeah, but there's the, I've never had to get into it, nor do I want to get into it, hopefully, but there's the whole implication. When does a cyber attack justify a kinetic response? And that's where, so far, we haven't necessarily seen that. We've seen economic responses.
Right.
I think President Obama was the most infamous for staring down Putin for the cyber attacks, way back when.
Yeah.
So
that's definitely interesting. But when we see a kinetic attack after a cyber attack, that will be maybe the beginning of World War III. That's hopefully not, right? But let's see.
So what do you think are going to be the real challenges for CISOs coming up in the next year?
So, with the recession, with the budgets that are going to be reduced or at least more tightly monitored, I think that the growing attack surface, growing number of vulnerabilities will require for sure a mechanism to be able to decide what is more important. To me, this concept of first understanding what you have and then being able to make smart decisions on where to invest will be the key challenge for 2023 and maybe 2024. Because again, there are a lot of things to do. The attackers are becoming smarter. They are being at least more efficient in their approach, even if they are using basic things. I always say basic foundations, password quality, password hygiene, patch management, network segmentation, interface protection. Those are things that we always discuss, and still those are the things that are being attacked. So being able to identify the things that will provide the return or the maturity level for the organization, for me, that will be the thing that the CISO needs to decide. All the rest, let's say the operational things, being able to detect, respond, and so on, those are important things. Those are challenges, and the CISO will need to manage that. But for that, there are different teams in his organization. The decision-making process will be around what is in and what is out, and that will be a very brutal situation in which you need to decide what do you invest in. Right?
Yeah, I would have to agree because, again, it's, I come back to my saying, CISOs get the budgets they deserve, not the budgets they need. And they need to deserve more. And I mean, that's part of it, but they have to figure out, and it's not just necessarily budget, it's people. Well, I guess people are part of the budget in many ways. I also see probably one of the problems that we usually wouldn't talk about is potentially the psychological well-being of the CISOs and their staff, because they are already under a lot of stress in many cases. And this is just going to put them under more stress unless somebody is, for example, an outright sociopath. They don't, they have a psychological, or they have guilt about firing people. And it's not something they take lightly. Like my friends who have had to I've had my own companies. I've been an executive, and I've had to unfortunately let people go. Most of the time it's been for performance-related issues, which I have less of a problem with. But sometimes, like these days with budget, it's gonna be hard to say this person is doing a good job. I want to keep them, but I know I am making a decision that is going to seriously financial impact them. And that becomes hard for a lot of people to make, on top of the fact that they are already burnt out. Now they know that they're going to have to cut their budgets. They're going to have to increase their risk, while, the bad people are going to be more active because of a recession, knowing they could get more money. And it's, so I think that besides of everything we spoke about, the psychological challenges are going to be pretty bad for CISOs in the coming year, at least for many of them that haven't figured out what they're doing.
That's an interesting angle. I don't think that the market is speaking about that, about the well-being of the CISO. And that's the burnout. That's definitely something that needs to be maybe discussed more.
Yeah, I think a lot of people lose sight of like this, because when I think I saw a study, I can't remember where it was from, but one of the biggest concerns of CISOs was they were talking more staff burnout, but that also impacts them most of the time. So they need to do a good job of that, and nobody is giving them the support. They have a organizational wellness department, but that is not made for what they're experiencing, nor going to have to experience.
So, one of the things that we hear a lot about lately is the topic of quantum computing and the impact to the cybersecurity industry. Why?
I mean, this is, I kind of always have been asking myself the same question, because essentially, so quantum computing at the end of the day is really just having a faster computer, which we've been getting the whole time. Now, theoretically, quantum computing allows for not just the 2 times every, like Moore's law, increases twice every 18 months, but exponential growth. And so far, there's problems with the technologies, so that's slowing it down. But give or take, I think, with regard to cybersecurity, the cybersecurity problems that people are having, like everybody talks about quantum encryption.
Right.
What they're concerned about is what type of encryption will stand up to the next 10, like 5 to 10 years when when the quantum computers are strong enough to have enough computing power to break current levels of encryption. And when I worked at NSA, I worked in the cryptanalysis group. And one of the things that everybody said was, you need encryption that's good enough for the purposes that you're going to encrypt. Like you're essentially buying time with encryption. So if you're talking tactical military operation, like you are commanding people on the battlefield, that the shelf life of that information might be minutes, maybe hours.
Right.
And so you need a light level of encryption. But for example, if I'm going to put a satellite in orbit that has a projected lifespan of 10 years, and then most people don't know, people don't want to replace the satellites in 10 years. So 10 years might become 15 to 20 years. And you have to figure out what encryption is going to be good enough for 20 years from now. Now, with quantum computing, the thing is that the encryption we thought was good for 10, 20 years might only be good for a few months now. And that becomes the bigger problem. Now, for right now, you have to look at what applications, what is the value of your data? Because a lot of people say, I need this great. I'm like, you don't need the great encryption. You need to have encryption appropriate to the value.
Right.
That's
key.
Yeah, that's the key.
Yeah.
And too many people lose sight of that. Now, there might be other quantum applications we have to worry about, perhaps, faster polymorphic attacks and things like that. Yeah. And that is
brute forcing and things that are time-based or computing-based that the computing power can contribute to. So everything that is really around trying to do a lot of things in a very short time, that's something that we need to be concerned about. But
yeah, and that's an important concept, that there are going to be things, and we do need to proactively prepare for that. Now, right now, quantum computers themselves are not sitting around like a laptop would be sitting around. So there's going to be a limited number of people who theoretically have access to quantum computers because they're still really expensive. And that's another factor leading into the time. Now, you have nation states that will clearly have access to quantum computing. And you have to consider, what do I want to do and what is my threat? Because again, you need encryption that is appropriate to the value and the threat that you have. And if for the average organization, you're not going to need to worry about this. And I think at the end of the day, the bad guys, once it gets practical, might not be practical for another 10 years when we have a quantum computer on everybody's desktop. But until then, I think a lot of people need to just focus on the basics, because I use an analogy of knights and dragons. In cybersecurity, we like to invent dragons. And why? Because we need to be the big knights and we want to go out and fight the bad guys. And the bigger the knight, the bigger the dragon, the more powerful we need to be as knights. The reality of the situation, though, is we don't have dragons, we have rats. And we have rats running all over the place, and we need to exterminate the rats. And it's not as fancy as trying to kill a dragon. You don't need, in theory, as much money as trying to kill a dragon. But right now, quantum computing is creating dragons, which may actually come around. But right now, we're missing all the rats. And we need to start focusing on the rats before we start worrying about the dragons, at least for another 5 years if you're a highly targeted organization, targeted by nation states, and probably not for another 10 years or so if you're, the average organization. I don't know what you've seen, but that's...
I'm totally with you. I couldn't agree more. I think that, it's being blown out of proportions in a lot of cases. I totally understand the concept of, if you talk about country secrets, those need to survive not only 10 years or 20 years. Then, of course, you cannot rely on the commercial encryption capabilities in order to protect this data. So what you said about, correlating the data protection mechanism with what is the value of the data that you want to protect, that's the key of everything around encryption in general. But I agree that that's a problem that we need to start maybe preparing for, but it's not now it's not the time to deal with it. And we see that there are a lot of conversation, a lot of efforts that are being done in some organizations, right? And some of them are those that are being really threatened by those nation states. So they are concerned. So I understand why they invest time and effort, but it has to be in the relevant proportion.
Yeah, and a lot of people, like, for example, and just for quantum computing, everybody's acting like the only thing quantum computing is going to be used for is to screw the average person. Quantum computing can be used and is being used, for example, for oil exploration, for doing modeling, for weather calculations and things like that, where it's actually good practical things. And everybody's trying to take something good and, again, making a unicorn into a dragon. And I wish they'd start seeing the benefits of it and stop worrying about this thing where hopefully the good guys are starting to proactively look to protect things on the implications for 5 to 10 years. But let's not lose sight of the positives that are going on too. So, again, CYE has been really good. Like Hyver is something I envisioned 25 years ago or so. And that's awesome. And so it's available and improving, but what do you see CYE doing over the next few years?
First, from my point of view, really my vision is to make it the standard in the industry. The way that you manage cybersecurity, that goes with the technical understanding, the risk profiling, and the financial figures for decision making. Making sure that every time that you make a decision, you can actually justify that and make informed decisions about cybersecurity. That's something, as we mentioned before, that we don't see enough. And that's from my point of view, the vision. You ask me where I want to be, I want every organization to use this approach. From commercial perspective, obviously, we want to become the de facto standard that everyone is using, and the industry is coming to us and asking how and why should we do that. Right? So that's the vision from my point of view. It includes a lot of things along the way, improving algorithms, being able to predict better, being able to identify costs better, and so on. But it's definitely a process that we are going there. That's exactly what we invest now. The data is really the key for our future.
Yeah, because one of the things that CYE is really great at is visualizing attack paths, networks, and things like that. Do you think that there might be applications outside of the cybersecurity department to run, for example, networks more effectively and efficiently?
That's a good question. I'm not sure, actually. Give me an example or something.
So, for example, if we map out attack paths in a network, and this is just Ira extrapolating here.
Yeah, okay.
It's interesting because there are some tools that do network monitoring, network performance, and things like that.
Right.
It's possible that if we do the information correctly, gather the right information, we could start, for example, to see where bottlenecks may develop from a performance perspective. We might see, for example, risks to connectivity, like access to clouds, operational data, and things like that.
The models work. The models are models, right? In the end, the science behind it, it's not cybersecurity science. This is really like graph theory and mathematical approach. So the use case, the application itself, definitely can be other things. For now, my passion is cybersecurity, so I'm going for cybersecurity. But I definitely see how those specific algorithms, concept, can be integrated in other applications, in other industries even. I'm thinking about medicines, for example, right? Like the healthcare environment. How you are able to use the same concepts in order maybe to identify or detect better illness, disease. That's something that can be interesting because if you think about it, there are a lot of commonalities between cybersecurity and the human body in a way.
Yeah. No, that's interesting because again, I just like you, I see the data that's inside like inside Hiver, and it's like something that allows me to like, like like obviously the interface is going to advance over the years, but it allows you to go ahead and pick and choose where there's vulnerabilities, where to pick in, identify, pull out, do what ifs, what if I pull this out? Right. Again, like I have this vision of like saying, okay, where's the most efficient way to, unfortunately, I hate that this question, like click a button, how much do I want to decrease my budget, and highlight where is the best place to decrease my budget and so on, as opposed to just doing a gut feel or, gee, this stuff I haven't signed this contract yet. And that might be the dumbest decision ever because I see a lot of people not signing a contract that could help them. And not even, obviously not even a Hiver contract, but a contract that literally can help them save money, but they're not going to sign it because they don't want to give up anything else and they need to know, hey, maybe I have to increase it a little here and cut there, and that'll be the best use of my money. And anyway, sorry, I just...
Oh, that's very interesting. So, a question to you maybe. Maybe we end up with this question. What actually made you come to CYE? We obviously think or know that we have a lot of things. I'm not trying to be humble here, right? That's not the point. But, a lot of people are asking, what attracts you to CYE?
Again, I mentioned this. It's like I've been talking about risk management in cybersecurity since 1996 and probably before. My first book, Corporate Espionage.
Before my bar mitzvah.
Before your bar mitzvah, of course. My first book was essentially a book about risk management applied to cybersecurity. And some people were calling it the Bible of the field. And I had my diagrams that maybe they'll cut in about how, really a cybersecurity program is about implementation of countermeasures to mitigate vulnerabilities as cost effectively as possible. Right. And that was my vision of how cybersecurity should be back in 1997, the date the book was published, and before, because I had to take a year plus to write the book. And that is when I saw Hiver, it was like, because I got the call from the recruiter. I'm like, okay, I'll talk. And then I started seeing the product. And the product actually did what I envisioned even better back in 1996. And that is something you can't understate, that because my goal has always been not to provide some flashy service, but to provide basic improvement of cybersecurity. And the way to do that is to look at it from a risk management perspective, risk optimization and calculation. And when I saw Hiver actually did what I wish I could have done, because I was describing it at the macro levels to say, for example, here's the graph. Let's look at, for example, multi-factor authentication. There are incidents involving compromises of credentials that cost organizations tens of millions a year. Multi-factor authentication might cost $500,000 a year. When you look at a $10 million a year, here's $500,000 a year. Clearly, you can cost justify that, go to management with those numbers. Hiver allows people to do it right because I previously described that unfortunately cybersecurity people are given a budget that is a pseudo-random number. And I say pseudo because maybe there's some logic to it, but saying, for example, you got 7% of the IT budget, that's a random number.
Right.
It's like, how does that impact risk? Well, I don't know. You got 7%, good luck. As opposed to when you use Hiver to manage the budget, the way it should be managed is, what is the level of potential loss I'm willing to incur? And then you determine your budget by what is the cost of security that will get me there. That's how you proactively do it. That's how risk management programs work. That's how cybersecurity should work, that I say, okay, let me look at all the potential countermeasures. Which are the countermeasures I want to implement that are most cost effective? And then I have that number. Then I could go to management and say, I want it. Then if management comes, then you could say, hey, you don't want to give me that? I'll back this off, I'll back that off, but still, here's my risk, and you tell me you want to absorb $20 million worth of risk because you don't want to give me $300,000. And you could do that with Hiver. And that's the way it should be done, and I wish it has been done, and everybody should do it because, again, cybersecurity is risk management, and anybody who says they're a security professional without calculating the science behind it is going to be a failure by definition.
Couldn't agree more. From my point of view, we are 100% aligned. Thank you very much for your time. Great to have you with us, and looking forward for a great journey and making the vision reality. That's what we are going to do now.
I appreciate the opportunity. Thanks.
Thank you.